Let us go back to the beginning. So, Lingbane Muta versus Terran. How does it work? Let's talk about compositions, because compositions in Legacy of the Void have kind of bounced around a little bit. There have been a lot of balance changes, so basically what players are trying to do is find the most solid and effective and high win percentage way of moving through the early, mid, and late game without dying to annoying stuff from Terran. So this game, I feel like, was a really good example of what the standard meta looks like in ZvT, but something that's worth considering is why a given progression is the standard. Because any given season, there will be certain builds that are more popular than other builds, but it's not random. It's more like a selection process, where the worst builds fall off because they don't win very much, and people prefer winning over losing. So you have builds like the double Medivac Marine drop that's super, super common in ZvT. I think Neuro was the one who started this. It's a very popular build because it's so strong, and you can go for it even when the opponent knows you're going for it, and that's kind of what makes a build standard as a macro build. So in the early game, I pull off gas. My plan is to use Ling speed and queens to defend early pressure, if there is any. Pulling off gas also boosts my mineral income, which allows me to afford a sneaky third base. So I sent my 20th drone down here, and then once I have my queens up and I've stabilized against this first Reaper and I float 300, I'll take my base. The nice thing about sending it early is, well, you do sacrifice some mining time, but you don't have to try and send a drone past a Reaper. It's really easy for the Reaper to just kill a drone before Ling speed is finished. So a lot of Zerg builds revolve around taking the third when you have Ling speed, but why not just tuck it away early on before the Reaper comes across the map, defend the Reaper with your Lings and your Queens, and then take your third base. That's one way that I get ahead in bases against Terran early on. So my defensive pieces right now, I have 2 queens live and a third queen on the way. I'm making some overlords. One useful thing to consider is your inject timing. So when an inject falls, you have 3 more larvae to spend all at once. You want to be making your overlords generally between the injects falling. Like whether you're trying to make lings or trying to make drones, you can make a bunch of units all at once. Otherwise, hatches produce larvae one at a time. That's a really good time to make some overlords. So between the inject cycles, I'm making 2 overlords, and then when the injects fall, I'm going to make either lings or drones. This game, I lost 2 lings to the Reaper, so the opponent has map control, they have initiative, and I decided to make just a few more lings to get some more value from ling speed, to push the Reaper off the watchtowers, and then go to the Terran side of the map with Scout. I would say this is the first important Scout in the game, aside from seeing that they do indeed have a natural expansion. The Ling Speed Scout, I'm looking to see whether the Terran is opening up with Hellions or Marines, because the response can be slightly different. Basically, that's the first big decision that Terran makes that you want to find out about. But then behind this, I'm just droning as hard as I can. 2 overlords are on the way. I have my third base up. I have 3 queens going over here to inject and creep around this location. My gas in the main was refilled, and I have a gas at the natural. The timing of this, I take my second gas when I have 16 on the line at the natural, and then when I fill this gas, I go back and I fill this gas as well. Someone in the chat is asking about the advantages of hatch gas pull, so hatch first versus pool first, basically. Hatch first gives you more larvae, but it can be slightly more difficult to defend the earliest cheeses. Pool first, you have less larvae. It's about 100 minerals less effective as a macro opening, but it can make you safer, so it kind of depends on personal preference. Would you rather learn slightly more difficult defense for cheeses, but still be able to defend them, or do you want to make the early game really easy on yourself at the cost of delaying your economy a little bit? So a little bit after 5 minutes is when the Medivac pressure will start to kick in. 2 Medivacs, 19 Marines, 35 SCVs, and I have 44 drones at this point. So for Zerg, if you're trying to defend these Medivac drops, generally you want to start making lings at around 4 minutes 30. If you're playing against Innovation or Byun, you need to make them at about 420. But at most levels of play, the Terran player is going to be a little bit late on their 2 medivacs. And then they have a decision. They can either like rush in and try and trade with your queens and lings. You could say, based on where their production is, the fastest route to put direct pressure on the Zerg would be to fly immediately left, land here, clear some creep, and then fight some queen ling, and pull back when it's no longer good for them to fight. This move they went for was killing an overlord to deny some information, and then flying into the main, which is more of a risky move, where if I have vision of it, well, I'll just send my queens and my lings to the main, and they can't unload. So that's the first main conflict when you're against the Medivac Marine, is deciding where and when the battle's going to be fought and having your units in place to defend. So I have enough to defend here, so I'm droning. Basically, the checkpoint for defending the double Medivac is about 30 lings and, what do I have, 7 queens? It's a pretty good amount. Notice I have 4 queens on a hotkey here. This queen is dedicated to injecting and it's not moving around. This queen is dedicated to injecting and it's not moving around. And same for this queen. It's really, really important for Zerg, especially if you're playing a Zergling-based style, to be disciplined with your queens and say, alright, the role of this queen is injecting. If a Liberator comes over here, she could shoot at it. But chasing around these Medivacs at the cost of injects is really bad. So if you want to have some defensive queens, you want to add that on to your 3 injecting queens to begin with. So here I'm taking gases and I'm just trying to get 3 base saturation. I'm ahead in the 3 base stage, and I have enough tools to defend this double Medivac Marine with my 7 queens, and I made a bit extra, 46 lings, because it is 6 minutes. They could have added a 3rd or 4th Medivac by this time. So I'll follow my vision so you can kind of see how I prioritize attention. Making an Overseer when Lair is done, to be able to see Widow memes. And then an Overseer to scout the opponent. Overseers, I would say, are highly underrated units, mainly because their impact is in information and decision making. It's not a very flashy unit where it's like, oh my god, look at that Overseer micro. But if you Overseer scout, you can get some really crucial information that can tell you, alright, this is how much I need a drone, this is what I need to make army, this is what their army composition looks like, and you can just crush them in the main fight when the Overseer facilitated that decision making process. So, early game, my composition was queens and Zerglings. They're both mineral only. Lings are really fast, queens are really tanky and sturdy and have anti-air. And then my mid-game composition is Lingbane Muta with 2-2. The reason Lingbane Muta is, I would say, a bit more solid against Biomine is because the units are faster, so it's easier to chase the Medivacs around and to kill those Medivacs than it is with Roach Ravager. And it also allows you to go really well into Tier 3 units. Zerg's Tier 3 units are Broodlords, Vipers, and Ultras. And those units benefit, with the exception of Viper, from melee upgrades, not ranged. So going from Roach Ravager into Ultra is usually a slightly weaker transition than going Lingbane Muta into Ultra, because you get that 3-3 melee upgrade started as soon as your hive is done. The Widow Mine feels bad, man. So, an ideal drone count to get to in pretty much every matchup, especially ZvT, I would say is around 65 to 70. And I'm not quite there yet. I want to get this 4th up and running. And right now I'm going for a big counterattack. This is another one of the big strengths of Zergling-based styles. They're very fast units, and you can use Banes and Queens to defend, while your Zerglings accomplish objectives on the Terran side of the map. I'm not really looking at these lings, I just sent them into the Terran territory. Just running there. I probably could have got some more value by microing this a bit more, but this really kind of makes the situation more complicated for Terran. If you don't put pressure on Terran, they can take all the time they need to get the most ridiculous, disgusting formation of Widow Mines outside your base and get the best pre-split known to man or Jesus, and then bait you into it and you just take a big fight and lose. And it feels like Lingbane Muta, oh, it's so flimsy against Widow Mines, I hate going for this. But if you just Notice when you have a bunch of Lings, and then you send them around the map into the Terran base, suddenly the Terran has to go from their army to back home to defend, to go to their army to make sure it's safe, to go to their new expansion. It's a lot more frantic. So with Lingbane Muta, maybe you can't just go A move and push across straight away, but you can put on a lot of pressure with the small Ling run by. That was one thing that Life was known for as a player, was just sending in Lings to the Terran bases and really punishing them for not paying attention all over the map all the time, which is not possible for a human player. So Lingbane Queen. Mutas are really good units. So one thing that a lot of players don't think about is, alright, what do I get for this unit? This is a Muta. Let's zoom in on the Muta. The Muta is 100 minerals, 100 gas. So it's the cost of 2 larvae worth of Zerglings with an additional 100 gas. It has 120 HP. It moves really fast, 5.6 move speed. It has a bouncing glaive attack that hits both air and ground, and it heals between combat. It regenerates life faster than most Zerg units. That's amazing. So the Muta is a really good unit if you can be a good steward of your Muta. Another thing to consider is effective Mutaflock sizes and what those can accomplish in your composition. And that kind of depends on what's your game plan. Is your game plan to solidly move from early, mid to late game? Or do you want to try and kill the Terran at some particular point? Because certain games, if the Terran player fucks up enough, you can go for a 2-2 Lingbane Muta timing and just kill them. Sometimes that'll happen if, say, they throw away a Medivac, they lose their first Reaper, they've just made a comedy of errors, you can just end the game there. But I would say a really good Mutaflock size to get into Hive Tech would be getting 14 Mutas. That's just enough to be able to hit Widow Mines before they trigger and detonate. You can put some pressure on their production if you want to, and you can also defend drops pretty well. But what you have to consider with Mutas is they're very, very value dense and fragile units. So if you just have them flying across the map and they fly over Marines and the Terran stims, you've just lost your whole Mutaflock. So you want to think about looking at your Mutaflock and babysitting it more than you babysit your ground army. Because these Lings and Banes, they're very cheap, they're very replaceable, you can make Lings super fast. So it's the Mutaflock that you want to really make sure stays alive and gets good value. There's a decision once you have your Spire. Do you want to get Mutas or Corruptors? My recommendation would be, if you're using the All Army button as your main means of controlling your army, do not build Mutas. Mutas should be moving around separately from Lings and Banes, because they'll naturally kind of fly faster than Banes and fly into Marines and they'll just die really easily. So they should have a separate role. If you don't have separate hotkeys for your ground army and for your Mutas, just make Corruptors. Corruptors you can A move, they're a bit slower than Lingbane, and they help you kind of clear the skies for the main fights. So I have Mutas, I'm continuing to put on pressure with Lings. I have 64 drones, that's a little bit low. I would like to get a bit over 70. I contaminated something. It's not a super crucial move, but it's a nice way to create a slight edge. I forgot overload speed this game, so I take a little bit more damage than I needed to. Overseers got buffed a while back, and it was primarily to allow Overseers to keep up with Lingbane Muta armies. You can see the Overseers lagging behind my Mutas right now, so I could get surprised by some Widow Mines. So I pretty much time it to where as soon as I have a decent Mutaflock, I drop the Infestation Pit, and as soon as the Infestation Pit is done, I take my Hive. That's kind of the progression for getting into tier 3. So here I just send my army to deal with the drop in the main. Normally it's bad to pull your whole army to deal with one Medivac of drop, but I know based on what my Mutas were seeing that the opponent's attention was focused on their side of the map, defending the Mutas. So I have some time to kind of move around with my army without dying. Another thing to think about is how many Banes should you make if you're not going to attack? A lot of players will just over-make Banes and they won't make Mutas and they won't tech up and they'll just kind of get stuck on basically hatch tech units with upgrades, which is pretty bad. If you make a bunch of Banes, generally either that's to get ready to defend an attack or to do an attack yourself. Otherwise, Mutas gain more value over time with their regen, or you could invest in tech to get up to tier 3. The next big, super strong unit to make against Terran is Ultra. This game I mixed in 2 Infestors. I didn't really want to make Pathogen Glands because my economy wasn't super great, so if you're not taking the Infestor energy upgrade, just make 2 to 3 Infestors. And adding some fungal growth really increases the danger of your army against the Terran. At this point, I decided to go in because I sent a counterattack to the Terran's base. You can see it on the minimap. Anytime you go for 2 attacks at once, usually the Terran is going to like, oh god, there are Lings in my base, I need to go look at this. And they won't be looking at their army, so they weren't split for that. So, Ultra Cavern, I have 71 drones, 3 Overseers. It's really, 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 really important to remake your Overseers. Mines will kill them, Marines will kill them. It's just a unit that you have to continually reproduce. So 2 Infestors, 7 Queens. I'm taking my 5th base. Dropping some Changelings. Changelings are really nice as just spy units that are annoying to the opponent to have around the map, because they know you're looking at them, they know you can tell where their army is. Sometimes you can even block their ramp. I would say that's a pretty advanced technique that sometimes can pay off, but isn't really a super high percentage move. Ultra Cavern is done. Chitinous 3/3, Adrenal Glands. Day 9 call it the Orange Quartet at Hive Tech. Those 4 upgrades really kick you into gear and represent tier 3 Zerg strength. So I'm injecting, I have my Infestors, just burrowing some Banes in the main attack lanes. Usually you'll have better success with burrowed Banes if they're not on creep, because when Terran is moving out to attack, they like to scan to clear creep so that you can't move quite as fast in your engagements against the Terran. So I'm filling gas on my 5th. I dropped the Nidus so I could potentially pressure in their main, but now they're kind of pressing the issue and trying to take an engagement against me. Whenever you have a pretty decent amount of Ultras, making Corruptors is really nice, because what are the logical counters to Ultras in the late game from Terran? Terran can either just try and kill you in the mid game and prevent you from even getting to Hive, or they can make Thors, Liberators, Ghosts. Those are kind of the big 3 threats to Ultras. And Corruptors are a lot more sturdy than Mutas, so you can just add those on top of the Ultras. They're a more similar move speed, and you can just A-move with some Corruptors, Ultras, Queens, and Infestors. So at this point I can kind of tell that the Terran is just concentrating all their strength in one point, so I'm pulling my Mutas in to help focus down the Liberators. The Ultras are moving forward. The Queens are dying, but that's minerals, I don't really care that much. Mutas kill the Medivacs. And then the main killer move against Terran is getting on top of their units and their unit production lines. If you focus a planetary, that's kind of the main place where they want to take a fight. So I think this is a planetary. Let's look. Yeah. This would probably be the worst place to take a fight, if I had to, because there's a base between this location and my reinforcement line. This is really nice because it's a forward orbital. I can just fight this, the orbital doesn't fight back. And this also cuts off their reinforcements from this lane. These Ultras would eat them up. And they don't really have stuff being rallied around this way, but I do have some Ultras there, if they did. One thing you can check in your own games is just look at the units tab when the fights are happening and think about the number of units of each type that you have. Unit diversity is usually an asset in StarCraft. It's a good thing. It makes you less exploitable if you have more different types of units. So I have 7 Corruptors, 4 Ultras, 3 Queens, 1 Infestor, 44 Lings, 18 Overlords, very well, spread all around the map. 4 Overseers, pretty good, 2 Banes here. Making Lings during an engagement is really nice too, because Lings can rejoin the fight before it's fully over. They produce super fast and they run super fast, that it's a way of getting more value from your Adrenal Glands, your 3/3 that's about to finish, and just fight the Terran straight up as fast as possible. So if the Terran did not die here, I would say I have, oh I had a really big gas bank, so I would probably want to focus less on lings after that and more into ultras. More ultras, more corruptors, take another Spire upgrade.